Next, I would like to talk about tuples. Now, it turns out that the output of our trajectory function that we defined in the cell above is really a tuple. Let's go back to this function. It was defined here. And we actually, when we talked about this function trajectory for the first time, it was under the title of multiple returns. We, at that point in time, wanted to illustrate that this function can be written to have two returns, two variables that it returns to the calling program, namely st and vt. And so in the calling program, it's received in record 9 when the function trajectory is called. When it's called, it's assigned to two variables s and v, and really s in this case is the variable st and v the variable vt, and it was printed out like that to the screen. So what I'm saying now is that really this left-hand side can be seen as a tuple, or it can be assigned to a tuple. Now, to show that what it means, I'm in this cell giving an assignment. On the right-hand side, I'm calling the trajectory function, the same function that was defined above, in exactly the same way as I'm doing right at the top of the screen. So the right-hand side is exactly the same. But on the left-hand side, instead of assigning the return from the trajectory function to two variables, I'm assigning it to a single variable called cm with the name cm. And then in the next line, record 2, I'm going to actually ask Python what is the type of this variable c, and I'm going to print that to the screen. And then I'm also going to print the variable cm itself to the screen. So let me execute the cell. If I do, I find that what is written here is the output from record 2. So Python tells me that the variable c, I should perhaps call it the object c, is of the class tuple. And then in the output from record 3, where I printed this tuple cm, I get the two answers exactly the same as before. The first one is 80.38 and the second one minus 19.62. So you can think of a tuple as a collection of objects or variables that Python allows you to define this. And a tuple does have certain limitations, and we'll also see in the next chapter that there's something like a list and even an array, and quite often in terms of calculations, it's easier to work with lists and arrays, as we'll discuss later. But we have this object, a tuple, that allows us to assign more than one variable to a single name. A tuple is always indicated in Python between round brackets, and typically you'll have a number, comma, and then the second number, as the output of this trajectory function is shown here to give us. Now, in the next cell, you'll see that I've got record 1 and 2, which is actually identical to record 12 and 13 in this cell. So actually, it was actually unnecessary for me to include record 1 and 2 here, because it, in a certain sense, redefines the variable s string and v string, but the definition is exactly the same as before. The point I want to make with this cell is I'm going to now print the s string, s underscore string, with a format function, so that doing it with a format function, of course, means that the placeholder between curly brackets is replaced by the value that's inserted in the format part between the brackets. And the same in record 4, I'm going to, in a certain sense, nicely format the output of the variable using the v string. But now note what happens here. Unlike in the cell above, where I then placed the variable s as the first variable from the output of the trajectory function call into the format, I'm here going to place cm, and that's the tuple. But I don't want the whole tuple in here. I just want the first element of the tuple, which is the 80.38. So you can call that first element by what is called indexing, and we'll later talk much more about indexing. But to indicate it's the first element, I use the number 0. In Python, 0 always indicates, in indexing, 0 always indicates the first element, and 1 indicates the second element. In other words, it's as if Python, when it starts counting, it doesn't start from 1, it starts from 0. So CM with square brackets and a 0 indicates the variable 80.38, which is the first element in the tuple. And in record 4, I'm going to print with a format statement, once again, a tuple value, but then the second one, which is the minus 19.62. So let me execute the cell, and we see that exactly what we had before when we defined the trajectory function output as s comma v. We had these two values printed, and now the output is exactly the same, because CM0 is actually the same as S above, and CM1 is exactly the same as V above. So in this cell, I'd like to illustrate a further point on tuples. Let's go back to multiple assignment. So in these two cells, we saw that we could have S comma V assigned to 100,5. An example of multiple assignment, Python reads this, that S is equal to 100 and V is equal to 5. And even with 3 variables in this cell, we had ST, VT, AT is 100, 5, 0. So this assignment assigns 100 to ST, 5 to VT, and 80 to 0. The point I'd like to make now with the next cell down here is if I can do, if I use on the right-hand side exactly the same, but on the left-hand side, instead of defining 3 variables or variable objects, I define a single object CT. And if I do this CT is actually a tuple. So let me execute this. When I'm going to print CT in record 2, you'll see that it prints a tuple. So if I execute the cell, you can see the output from record 2 is a tuple with the first element 100, the second a 5, and the third a 0.